What we are discussing, sir, is the understanding of death, its relation to living, and this thing called love. One cannot possibly understand the immensity, and it is immense, what this thing called death, unless there is real freedom from fear. Without really freeing the mind, unless the mind frees itself from fear, there is no possibility of understanding the extraordinary beauty, strength, and the vitality of death. Beauty, strength, and the vitality of death. If we are inquiring into this question of death, fear must be completely non-existent in us. Then I can proceed. Then I can find out what death means. If one isn't frightened deeply, then what is death? What is it that dies? And then what? You live 100 years. For what? For this kind of life? Fighting, quarreling, bickering, bitterness, anger, jealousy, futility, a meaningless existence. It is meaningless existence as we are living. So, what is it that dies? And what is it I'm frightened of? Losing the known? Losing my wife? Losing my house? Losing all the things I've acquired? Losing this content of consciousness? Losing this content of consciousness. Can the content of consciousness be totally emptied? The living. The dying is the living. When the content is totally emptied, that means no attachment. It is not a brutal cutting off, but the understanding of attachment, the understanding of dependency, the understanding of acquisition, power, position, anxiety, all that. The emptying of that is the real death. The emptying of consciousness means the consciousness which has created its own limitation by its content comes to an end. So, death becomes a living when the content of consciousness, which makes its own frontier, its own limitation, comes to an end. And that this is not a theory, not a speculative intellectual grasp, but the actual perception of attachment. Being attached to something, property, man, woman, the attachment, and the battle to be detached. But the attachment brings pain. Therefore, I say to myself, I must be detached, and the battle begins. And the whole content of my consciousness is this. Now, can that content be empty itself? Not emptied by an act of perception. Empty itself, which means can this whole content be observed with its unconscious content. I can be consciously aware of the content of my consciousness. My house, my property, my wife, my children, my job, the things I've acquired, the things I've learned. I can be consciously aware of all that. But also there is deeper content in the very recesses of my mind, which is racial, collective, acquired, the things that unconsciously I have gathered, the influences, the pressures, the strains of living in a world that's corrupt, all that is seeped in, all that is gathered in there, of living in a world that's corrupt. So my question is, can the mind be aware totally of all the content, hidden as well as the open, the collective, the personal, the racial, the transitory, whole of that? The mind must see its content, must be totally aware of it, not fragments of it. Content of my consciousness is consciousness. That consciousness is me, my ego, my saying I. It's very important to find out. I, who have worked, who have lived a righteous life or unrighteous life, who have done so much mischief or good, I have struggled to better myself. I've been so kind, so gentle, so angry, so bitter. And when you say empty your consciousness, it means you're asking me to die to all that.
Why don't you breathe in? Breathe into me and breathe out through me. Why don't you breathe in? Breathe into me and breathe out